What's going on YouTube? Glorious here, back with another Scarlet Violet video, and today we're going to be talking about some news that was dropped on us last night, very late last night, and that is the upcoming rule set for the new regulation. It was announced, okay, and for Regulation I, it will be, in fact, GS Cup format, also known as dual restricted format. That means you get not one, but two restricted on your team. So this is something that we've known for a while now, or at least anticipated. There were tons of online tournaments for the last couple of months, just getting ready for Regulation I, okay? So we do have some data to look at just in terms of what we can expect early on here, but we are not strangers to dual restricted format. If you played in Sword and Shield, okay, we did have dual restricteds for a while there. The only difference, of course, with then and now is dynamax versus terastallization. But still, even though there is no dynamax here, a lot of the principles are still going to apply just in terms of team building with dual restricteds, okay? You're going to get a little bit more diverse building, that's for sure. And now what you could do with some of your restricteds is vary up the sets a little bit, because now one restricted can further support another and can kind of, combat some of the weaknesses that one might have. And we'll talk about some of that a little bit when we, discuss some of our initial thoughts and ideas. But that's kind of how I see dual restricted format. One restricted, will patch up the weaknesses, for another, and vice versa a little bit. And then, of course, after that, you just slap on a lot of different staples, at least in the early get-go, just to kind of feel out the format. And we're going to do that in our early team building videos for a lot of these dual restricteds, because when you want to try something for the first time and you're still not sure where the meta is at, just use like standard good stuff Pokemon, and that'll kind of give you an idea of just what exactly is strong, what exactly, is not so great, okay? And then at the same time, we do have some data to look at that can kind of further guide us just in terms of the early get-go of what we want to do, okay? But, the other important thing with the announcement was the time frame for this format. So you can see right here, it says it's going to go from May to August, okay? That is 4 months, but the bigger part is it will be in August, so that means that is the format for the World Championships, okay? So if you have already qualified for Worlds, or if you hope to qualify for Worlds, this is the format now. So you have to be super, super good at this format if you really want to excel at the World Championships here, okay? So you got to get good with your dual restricteds, because again, that will be the final format for the World Championships. It just makes you think, where are we going to go after World Championships? Like after August, what will be the next format, okay? Because we still got some time left, with Scarlet and Violet, but that is a discussion for another day. So what I'm going to do here is, after this portion of the video, I'm not going to do like full-fledged team building in this video. I'm just going to give, some initial thoughts and combinations on what I think could be really, really good and what I expect to be strong in the early get-go. And then this will hopefully guide some ideas, just for you guys in terms of trying out stuff. But, we will do like full team building videos on a lot of these dual restricteds, but, those will be like separate videos, not in this one, of course. But yeah, get ready for some stuff. We got some teams planned for you guys, okay? So as always, right, that's like the bread and butter of this channel. We always put out a bunch of teams to try out in the beginning, and this format is no different. We have a lot of experience from the Sword and Shield era, and a lot of that will carry into this, of course. But of course, the difference now is we got some other restricteds that we can play with now, and you already see it on the screen. You've got Miraidon and Calyrex now, and they're going to be big players for sure in the dual restricted format as expected. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to talk a little bit about some of these pairings and mention why they're going to be pretty good, and just some ideas that you can use with them, just so that you get some inspiration moving forward. Okay, so let's go and talk about our first pair. I want to start here with Zamazenta first of all here. I think Zamazenta is just going to skyrocket in usage now in a dual restricted format. Remember, prior to this point, Zamazenta was struggling a little bit in the single restricted. It was still like okay, but it wasn't getting as much results as it was early on, and that's kind of like more or less power creep stuff. But now Zamazenta can have a better role in a dual restricted format, because now you can be that supportive restricted for your more offensive restricted here, and you can patch up its matchups that it can struggle against here, right? So like this wide guard supportive restricted, same like Lunala, right? Which we'll talk about a little bit later in the video. But now that you have Zamazenta, or at least access to Zamazenta, you don't need to find that budget wide guard user anymore. You don't need to go out and, you know, work super hard and make Bastion work, for example, right? Oh my goodness, look at this image there, right? You don't need to do this anymore. Now you actually can use Zamazenta here, right? And I think one of the easiest partners that you can pair with Zamazenta in the early get-go is the Calyrex Shadow Rider. Oh, wow, look at that for the April Fool's image. I think this is one of the first easiest pairs that you can expect to see early on if you haven't already seen it already, you know, in the regulationI showdown ladder here. But, you know, just think about like Calyrex Shadow Rider, what it's kind of weak to. It's like all those dark types running around. So, for example, something like Incineroar or like Chiyu, you know, Chenpao, Calyrex Shadow Rider can kind of struggle against those guys, but now you offer Zamazenta, and now you can just click Body Press into Instant, not have to worry about that thing anymore. Body Press, you know, the Chenpaos and whatnot. Same thing with the Chiyu, you get to outspeed it, or you force it to Terra, you know, technically. But now Zamazenta can kind of patch up a lot of those matchups. You don't have to get snarled anymore. You're not weak to like quote unquote like Glacial Land stuff or the mirror matchup like, you know, Astro Barrage. So Zamazenta really helps out the Calyrex here, okay? And then just in terms of like building, you can keep things relatively simple in the early get-go with something like this. So something like, you know, just giving yourself a defensive backbone like Instant Amoonguss is just like an easy way to start with Zamazenta and Calyrex, right? Like you've got your two restricted. Now give me that solid backbone here. So like you don't even have to necessarily use it, you know, Amoonguss. You have access to Ogre Pawns now. That's like one of the key differences, you know, with Scarlet and Violet and Sword and Shield, you know, besides the fact that you get additional Pokemon now and like, you know, there's no Dynamax and stuff, okay? You can do stuff like this now, and then, you know, you can just add stuff like, you know, the Chenpao, Tornadus, and already this is like an easy starting team here, right? Because, you know, you have like Zamazenta, Chenpao ideas with Amoonguss. This was like already a core for, you know, in Regulation G. Wait, what is this? Oh my goodness, look at that. This is my first time seeing like the April Fool's images. Okay, then you just do like Calyrex instant stuff. Okay, you know, just fake out and set up nasty plot. Okay, and then you still have speed control on your side with Tornadus. Okay, so now this is gonna let you outspeed, you know, the Miraidon Tailwind teams, the other Shadow Rider Tailwind teams. Okay, so, you know, this is just like a very easy general starting team to use. Okay, and if you don't like something like this, then you can go for a little bit more of a balanced approach. So if I take like a lot of this stuff out, you don't even necessarily need Tornadus. You could do stuff like, you know, just the Ogre Pawns, right? You could do like an Ogre Pawn Heart Flame, for example. Then you can still use like Chenpao and Rillaboom here. Okay, and then just round it out with Urshifu. You know, just good old standard balanced stuff. That's the wrong Urshifu. What was that? I didn't even see that April Fool's image over there. Oh my god. But yeah, you can even just do something like this, and this is just another way of starting off relatively balanced here, right? Like Chenpao is just going to enable all these physical hitters just like Zamazenta, and here is your special attacker here. Don't be surprised if Calyrex Shadow Riders start varying up their sets and they start doing stuff like Will-O-Wisp, and they also start doing stuff like Snarl or even something like Disable, right? I do expect, you know, some of these supportive Calyrex Shadow Riders to, you know, be running around now that we have dual restricteds. So we'll have to wait and see what exactly their builds look like. But what I'm saying is like this is like another example of a build that you could do. So you could do like standard hyper offensive stuff, or you can just go and play it safe for like a little bit more balanced ideas, right? So I think that, you know, we'll do like more team building, you know, with these guys a little bit later when we do like a full-fledged team building video. But like those are just some like early squads that you can just consider using with both of these. All right, looking at Calyrex Ice Rider here for a second here. So now we know how good this thing is in Regulation G, single restricted, right? Very, very strong Trick Room sweeper, of course. But one of the matchups sometimes that the Calyrex can struggle a little bit is something like Kyogre there, because again, you know, something like Ogre can resist the Glacial Land stuff. Well, if we had something that can pressure the Kyogre immediately, then the Ice Rider is looking pretty good after that. So something like Miraidon is another good pairing with Calyrex Ice Rider. So, you know, you get to pressure the Kyogre, you outspeed it and just hit it super hard, you know, with your electric type attack. So I think these two are also going to be a very, very good and easy pairing. And a lot of the supporting cast for Miraidon is very splashable with Calyrex Ice Rider. So for example, you can still do stuff like Iron Hands and Farigiraf, right? And then just slap on, you know, some redirector here. One of the Ogre Pawns, honestly. Like you could do either the Cornerstone or the Heart Flame Ogre Pawn. I think either or can work fine. And Calyrex Ice Rider has used these partners before, so it's relatively splashable. Okay, and then after this, you can just slap on like an Urshifu over here. and then just kind of call it a day. Or you can just easily take out that and just go with something like a Whimsicott. So at least you still have like a fast mode here. But think about it. You have a fake out user, you have a redirector, you have another Trick Room setter, but you can easily enable the Ice Rider this way. You have a Trick Room core here, and you still have a lot of your, you know, Autobega Luca 6 over here, even though it's like more of a 5-man core now. But this is also something that can still work out fine, right? As long as you got these two, you know, the last 2 slots is really just up for grabs, but this is something that can also work relatively easily, right? You can even just explore Chi-Yu options here, right? Just to patch up some other matchups a little bit, but this also works fine as well if you want to do something like this. I've even seen some ideas where you just slap on a Ditto onto something like this, and now you can, well, that's kind of funny. Now you have the idea to even like get a 3rd restricted onto your team there, right? And that's kind of funny when you think about it. But I think just, you know, starting with these 4 is just an easy, safe way to start building your Calyrex Miraidon teams. Because again, you know, you have a fake out user that can also benefit in the terrain here. You can easily lead Calyrex Iron Hands also, you know, just fake out, click Trick Room here. Ferrograph is also pretty good, you know, just in terms of, you know, denying pressure into the Miraidon, because again, you know, if this is toy specs, it can get faked out, it can get priority blasted here. So something like Ferrograph is also really good with stuff like this. And again, like I said, just some other speed control mob with like an Urshifu here, maybe another redirector is just relatively safe. You can even just have full screens on this and just go with something like Grimmsnarl, and I think Grimmsnarl works well on these teams. We've seen how well Grimmsnarl Miraidon teams have been working as of late, and I think Grimmsnarl Calyrex Ice Rider teams have also worked well in some recent regional plays, so there's no reason why Grimmsnarl can't work with these 2 restrictors here, okay? So I do think Calyrex Miraidon teams are going to be very, very good. It's probably maybe one of my favorite pairings right now. I've been experimenting a little bit with some of these cores, and I like Ice Rider Miraidon a lot right now, just because they're very oppressive. They do a lot of damage, and they allow you to run multiple modes, whether it be like the fast mode or the slow mode, and it just feels like really solid right now. Kind of like Zamazenta here, I think Lunala is also going to get a very, very high bump in usage. You know, for the same reason, it can be that supportive restricted with Wide Guard now. That can back up your other more offensive restricted. So if you think back to, well, we're still in it, but if you think about Regulation G with Lunala, finally it's getting some play here, but you have to work relatively hard still, you know, because sometimes Lunala is a little bit torn between, you know, being this, you know, offensive damage dealer, but also being this supportive Pokemon that can set up Trick Room and also click Wide Guard for your team. And it's kind of hard for Lunala to do both, but you know, people have been trying to do it, okay, with some success, I guess. But now Lunala is more in its natural role in a dual restricted format where it can specifically be used a little bit more supportive, right? Would still deal some damage, of course, but now you could have Wide Guard and Trick Room on your team, okay? And realistically, you want Wide Guard for something that will struggle against maybe something like Calyrex Ice Rider or even something like Calyrex Shadow Rider. So, for example, I do think something like Lunala and Koraidon is quite good. Or even like Lunala and Groudon, for example. Lunadon, right? I think this pairing, you know, whether it be Lunala, Groudon, Lunala, Koraidon, is going to be explored more just because these guys, one of their biggest knocks is their team comps are good, but they struggle a little bit, you know, actually a lot against the Ice Rider matchups, okay? It's a little bit difficult, okay? There are ways around it, of course, but it's still somewhat difficult. But now, Lunala patches that up a little bit because now you're forcing the Calyrex Ice Rider to not even click Glacial Lance, force to click a little bit more of a suboptimal move, and then you can pressure it with your own Moongeist Beam, okay? And that's really good, right? Because, you know, you need something to pressure the weakness of both of these guys, right? So I think something like this is going to be used a little bit more. Now, of course, Groudon, of course, has another thing where it can just miss Precipice Blades, but we've seen in previous formats like in Sword and Shield how, and even before that, like in Sun and Moon, how strong Lunala and Groudon were. But even something like this, where like Lunala and Koraidon can be used together, then I think just something like Roaring Moon is actually really, really good. Look at this image for them. I think this is just an easy way to start. And then something like this with, what's that thing called? Landorus is actually really, really solid because now you get a Tailwind setter on this. And think about what Lunala can kind of struggle with. Something like Incineroar, it can struggle with because you don't really have too much for it unless you're running like Meteor Beam set. but this is where you have a strong fighting type like Miraidon to really pressure the Incineroar. And then at the same time, you have Roaring Moon that can give Lunala a little bit of speed control, with Tailwind stuff. Landorus is also pretty good against Incineroar stuff. So I think something like this is going to be quite solid here. And you don't even necessarily need Miraidon here, but at the very least, you have these three. And then something else can utilize, these two supporting Castmons. I also think Lunala and Miraidon also makes a lot of sense. Not Miraidon, I'm so sorry. I mean Miraidon. Okay, because again, Miraidon also sometimes can struggle against the Calyrex Ice Rider because again, you are a Dragon type, you're weak to the Glacial Lance. So I even just think something like this where you just add a lot of Miraidon's staples. You just have an Iron Hands here, you have an Ogerpon, Heart Flame, and then you just have like a Whimsicott here. So you still have, this hyper offensive mode, okay, but you also have like this slow mode here. You have Fake Out and Redirection to try and set up Trick Room here. But I think something like this is also going to be pretty easy to build around, just like as a little starting point. But again, it's looking really good on a lot of these teams. Okay, you can even do Lunala and the other Calyrex, right? Calyrex Ice Rider 2. I think Lunala and this is also going to be solid. Like, you could easily just do this, right? Instant Amoonguss, and then just slap on Lunala here. Like, this is very easily a good starting 4-man core here. And then you can even add something like Urshifu here, just for a little bit more breaker damage. And this is another starting core that you can utilize, just with the Calyrex Ice Rider. It's something that has been done before, in Sword and Shield. So I do expect this a little bit more play as time moves on. And to an extent, with the Calyrex aside, I also think Zacian gets a little bit more play now. Okay, so like I could even see Lunala Zacian teams to an extent. Now Zacian, let me take off Lunala for a second here. Now with Zacian, okay, if you need like a strong steel type along with your dragon restricted, I think Zacian makes a lot of sense too. Because now you have a bulky, strong steel fairy type that can pressure the Calyrex Ice Rider and the Miraidon teams too, okay? So like you Behemoth Blade is really strong. You have Play Rough, of course. You can even do like substitute protect stuff like we did in the Sword and Shield idea, or you can even just do like something like Swords Dance. I've seen there's a little bit of alteration between the two, but I think Zacian teams can definitely do well. Like you could easily just do like Tornadus, Landorus here, okay? You could do the Regidrago stuff if you really want to, but I think like Zacian squads can also do relatively well, just in this kind of format, just because you're not the only restricted now. Because by itself, Zacian was like a little, I'm not really so sure. But now, you can use it as like a secondary restricted, and then you can just do something like this. You have like Zacian Tornadus, you can add like Miraidon here, okay? And then you can still add the Ogerpon stuff, okay? Heart Flame makes a lot of sense. You can even just make this Whimsicott too if you really want to, right? Like, again, a lot of Miraidon's core is easily just splashable with like a secondary restricted. So I do expect something like this that could be good with Zacian. But you need something to pressure the Ice Rider, right? So I think, these two can work as well. And of course, remember the good old classic combination that worked really well in Sword and Shield? Remember Swordfish? So like, we'll speak a little bit more about Kyogre later, but remember this, like Tornadus, right? And then you just had like Incin and Amoonguss here. Yeah, I do expect, people will try this more a little bit as the format progresses, just because, it is something that has worked in the past, just because, again, Zacian loves the rain, because you're, again, removing one of its key weaknesses, which is like, fire type damage. So I think something like this is very easy to use. And then you just slap on Chenpao, right? Like you've seen what Zacian, Chenpao, Amoonguss teams have done in the past, right? And, this will work again as well. Sometimes you used to see like Regieleki on these teams, but now you can just add Chenpao, where now, Zacian does a little bit more damage. And what you can even do with this is you can say like, I don't really need the instant. I just want more damage, with these guys. And now give me that Urshifu that has done so well on these Kyogre teams. Now you add Zacian here, okay? And now all of a sudden, you have your more modern day Swordfish team, right? It's just like using some of these familiar ideas that has already worked in Reg G, right? I'm gonna take away Zacian for a second. Like, this is nothing new. Like, we've seen this already, okay? This last slot, was up in the air. This was like Iron Hands. This was like, Landorus, for example. double genie. This was something like, you know, Serena, for example, just to deny priority. Okay, but now you have the option to add something like Zacian here, and now all of a sudden you're looking really good just in terms of a swordfish idea. Now I still think you want to add something here to this core, maybe just to deny like priority stuff. Maybe a Furgraph can come onto a team like this. So I think something like that could be good. But overall, I think this is like another good starting core that you can use for Reg G. I'm sorry, Reg I. Okay, just to list like some other pairings that I think can also just be like really good. I just think, you know, just straight offense like Miraidon and Calyrex Shadow Rider teams are also going to be good, just because you can always slap on a Tailwind user like Whimsicott onto these teams. And then from here, the same thing. You can still slap on stuff like Incin. Okay, you can even slap on something like the Ogerpon Heartflame over here, and then just go with like complete hyper offense stuff, and then just have a little bit of balance with the Iron Hands, and then maybe like another Trick Room, you know, setter like a Furgraph, for example, right? I still think something like this is really, really good in the early get-go as well. You know, just for a little bit of just straight raw damage. I also think Koraidon can also be a pretty decent pairing with Calyrex Shadow Rider as well. Just because, again, something like Incin, Chant Power, Chiyu can really bother the Calyrex here. But Koraidon does well into a lot of those, especially if you have like the Terra Fire option available. So you can use Koraidon to handle those dark types that can give Calyrex some trouble, because again, you are a fighting type. And then, you know, Chiyu doesn't really do anything not that much to the Koraidon, right? Because you can pressure it, you outspeed it. Okay, and then from here, you can just add stuff like, you know, Chant Pow over here. You can add, you know, your Raging Bolt, you know, your Photosynthesis Mons over here. And then, you know, just build off of this core, right? And then, you know, you can even add something like a Chiyu over here, right? If you really want to make your Calyrex team a little bit stronger, and something that can also benefit with the Koraidon. So like, remember how Koraidon can enable the Raging Bolt and the Chiyu here? Now you add something like Whimsicott here, you know, again, a little bit more speed control, and then you're just kind of chilling with these 5, right? Because it's very strong, you know. This 4 was already pretty good. You know what you're getting with Koraidon, Raging Bolt, and Chiyu. So like, you're saying you're sharing a lot of the splashable cores with each other. So there's no reason why this can't work either, right? So I think that's also a combination that can work relatively well. And then just, you know, thinking of like other stuff, I even think, where's that other one that I was trying to remember? Like another solid special attacker that was really good. Like we already mentioned like Calyrex, you know, Miraidon stuff here. Oh, how about this one? What about like Kyogre? Okay, and then just Miraidon itself. Oh my goodness. Okay, yeah, I could even see stuff like this. You know, with Kyogre, Miraidon, you like, again, another Tornadus Tailwind user. You can have Iron Hands here, which again is something that was used along with Kyogre, you know, in recent regional play. So I still think something like this can come back. And then you add Serena here, you know, for just like anti-priority stuff, because again, Miraidon doesn't love that either. That's why, you know, Furgraph was on these teams. And then you just add something like, I don't know, a Ditto just to patch up a couple different matchups. So something like this can also just be like relatively solid altogether. You know, this is just another way to build a Kyogre team that, you know, has a lot of familiar cores and usable cores with Miraidon. I still think something like this is also pretty good. And then you can even do the Ice Rider stuff with Kyogre, right? So let me just put that on the screen here. So Calyrex, Kyogre stuff, like we've seen this in the past as well, you know, from, you know, Sword and Shield stuff. So I think just having something like this could also like be relatively solid, just because, you know, the Kyogre can get rid of like Incineroar stuff, which is really good and kind of what you want as well. But I think just something easily just with these guys, like something like, you know, Iron Hands, and then something like Furgraph is also really good. You know, just again giving you a fake out user and another Trick Room setter. I think something like this has been done before. You know, I'm just like, you know, just spoon feeding ideas at this point, but I want to try a lot of these cores. I've tried some already, but, you know, just like some of the supporting casts is just things that I've been tweaking a little bit, but some stuff has been used before. And, you know, just because it did work in Sword and Shield, it could work again and should work again, has worked again right now in Scarlet and Violet. But of course, we get some new partners and some new adjustments. The one restricted that I'm kind of like looking at, and I'm not really sure where it kind of fits into the meta, at least right now, very early on, you know, day one, is Terapagos here. Now, I'm just thinking like there's going to be like a lot more Zamazenta. Okay, there's actually going to be a lot more Miraidon, especially. So I'm just wondering, like, there's going to be a lot more things that are going to pressure this thing. So I don't know where Pagos fits in on a lot of these dual restricted cores. I'm not entirely sure. I still think maybe Screamtail and Heatran can come to some of its cores. But other than that, we'll have to wait and see what's like a decent partner that can go with Pagos. Like, it can be still a decent restricted there, but I'm just not really sure right now where this falls, especially when there's like other easier restricted pairings to use besides Pagos and something else. With the format progressing more and more later on, we'll probably get at least an initial answer as far as like what else can be used with Terapagos. But I'm not really sold on using it right now. I want to like kind of wait and see what works, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. But I'm just thinking about like, you know, just so much more fighting types right now and things that pressure this. I'm not really sure if this is something that is going to get explored in the early get-go, but maybe later on, I think we could see a little bit more play. But anyway, that's it for now. So hopefully we gave you some easy initial ideas to consider for your regulationI, you know, ladder needs. Because again, you can start testing right now on Showdown. Of course, it's been live for, you know, some hours now. But if you still need some help, if you're not sure how to construct a regulationI team, and if you need some help and you're not sure what to do or how to do your EVs, okay, that's what we're known for. So sign up for a tier 3 coaching session with us. So if you look in the video description below, as well as in the pinned comment section, there is a link to join the channel with the tier 3 sub, and we can help you build a regulationI team, you know, just to start and, you know, test your ladder needs. If you're trying to go to a regional later on, if you got some league challenges that are going to start introducing regulationI and you need something to go to those, then sign up and then we can help you out and we can build the team from scratch. Okay. But other than that, you know, there's still Regulation G. Okay. There's still things to play for. We still have a couple more regionals. So moving forward, we're still going to use a few more Regulation G teams that I want to get off and use. But other than that, we're going to mix in our leftover Regulation G content with a lot more team building videos with regulationI. So this way we can give out and pump out more squads for people to use in the early get-go. So this way they can get a feel for the early meta in the initial stages. All right, but that's it for now, folks. We'll be back with another video in the next one. Peace out and have a good one.